Hey there. So a lot of you have asked me if I would do a video that goes a little bit slower and goes through some more basic tips and tricks. And so what I'm going to do today is just that. I'm going to make a video. I'm going to call it Nomad for Noobs. And this is basically if you haven't really done much 3D sculpting or messed around with Nomad much, hopefully this video can be a good place to start. Joining me, I have my production partner, my son, who also edits and does the music for these videos. Before I get too started in the sculpting, I just want to give a basic overview. When you have Nomad, you can use your finger to rotate around an object. You can use two fingers to pan a camera, and you can use a pinch zoom in and out. Really basic stuff. Over here on your right, you'll see that you can click through the different brushes, like our clay brush, our regular brush. I have the sharp brush that I have a short tip on in one of my other videos. And these are all little brushes that can be used to manipulate the model. By default, everything is symmetrical. Over here on the left, we have our symmetry. You can turn that on and off so you have not symmetrical or have it symmetrical. I'll save this real quick. We'll call this Noob Sculpt. So Nomad, by default, this pops up. It wants to autosave as you go so you don't lose your work. So we're going to go ahead and give it a name to autosave to. Over here, you can change the size of your brush. And you can adjust how intense each brush works. So right now with the clay brush, if I turn it all the way up, if you hit it, you can see it's pretty intense. You turn it all the way down, you can see it'll like barely do anything. So that's some basic stuff. For the most part, I use an Apple Pencil with this, and it's pressure sensitive. So the harder you push, the more intense it is, and the less you push, the less intense it is. And that's things that you can actually adjust up here in the top right where there's a little hand icon if you want to get into that. We won't get into those settings here. You can also turn on or access your symmetry features up here as well. All right, so that's kind of the basics here. There's some other little tips and tricks. The other two that we'll use a lot is over here on the left. We have subtract, which makes the brush do the opposite effect. In some brushes, it doesn't say subtract, but like for instance in the move brush, you can move things in and out. It switches to normal mode, which actually moves things towards camera and away from camera. And then we have the smooth tool, which smooths everything out. So it's pretty common practice to say, use a brush and then smooth it out. Use a brush, smooth it out. Pretty common practice. And then we have a mask, and the mask allows you to paint things that cannot be affected by the brush. So you see we've masked this out, so now when we brush around it, it won't even touch the mask part.
So with smooth, is it ever possible if you like smooth something or do something that you didn't really want to do, is it ever possible to undo? Is there a button for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So fortunately in Nomad, you can undo and redo, and you can access those down here at the very bottom left. You can see it has the number 26, 25. That's the number of undos. So the number of steps I can undo. And once you hit it, you can actually redo. Now, I believe you can double tap with 2 fingers to undo as well. And I think double tap with 3 fingers to redo. So which is pretty common in other apps is 2-finger double tap, or maybe it's just 1 tap. 2-finger tap for undo, 3-finger tap for redo. Or you can hit the buttons at the bottom. So yeah, very good question. So with that said, I think we can jump into a sculpt. Actually, there's one other thing I wanted to mention, and that's up here on the very top, we have our scene menu, which is where we can add geometry. For instance, we can add a box here, or we can click on the scene menu, add a cylinder. And as we add those things, they're all listed right here where you can select the different parts and say we could delete them. So now I'm just left with the box. I no longer have that sphere I was messing with. And we're going to access that here pretty soon. So what I wanted to sculpt is my other son had a drawing that was sitting on our fridge, was mounted up on our fridge, and I thought it would be a great basic sculpt to dive into of a cat. So Nomad will allow you to import reference images to look at when we sculpt. So I'm going to show you that by hitting this image button up here next to the camera at the top. We can turn on a reference image. And from here, if you hit the plus button, you can actually import from your photos or files. I already have the reference image imported. I had pulled it in earlier, and here it is, the cat. When I have it selected, I can use, let's see, I can move around here in the scene. You can see it there, but I believe I can hit the transform button, and we're now in the reference transform. So I can move it, scale it around, and it'll just lock to that view until I hit a simple tap, it says, to exit transform mode. So I'm going to tap once.
Whenever you're importing your image, we had a little bit of technical difficulties earlier. If your photo is a live photo, it will not import it into Nomad.
We were having trouble importing this earlier. We weren't sure if it was because of live photo or because it was too big or what. It eventually imported. So if you run into issues, maybe I opened it up in Procreate, saved it out as a JPEG, or just make sure you don't take a live photo is probably the smarter thing to do and import it. Nevertheless, we got it imported here. So taking a look at this cat, there's probably a number of ways we can start it. Here I have the box. I'm going to go, and I think I'm actually going to start the cat with a cylinder. So I'm going to go to my scene tab up here, and I'm going to hit cylinder, and it adds the cylinder to the scene, except we can't see it, right? But if I hit the scene button and I go back to the box and just hit the trash can next to the box, that'll delete it. And here you can see my cylinder. Now, anytime you create a new piece of geometry into your scene, or you add some geometry in your scene, it gives you some little transform gizmos to allow you to scale things. You can make it taller, wider, whatnot. So this is going to be my main body of the cat. I'm going to set it up here on top of the grid, which is kind of the floor. And you can see how that's kind of the shape of the cat. I might make it a little bit taller by dragging on this little green circle here and get that to a place where I like it. Now, as soon as you hit validate, it gets to where you can't manipulate these things. You also can't manipulate some of the other geometry settings I'm going to take a quick look at. And that is right next to the scene button. There's this little waffle. It's a grid. And if you click on it, it's got some of our settings for our cylinder. One of those things is the divisions of the cylinder. You can see how it changes, how dense it is, and you can turn it way down and get to a hexagon or something. There's also something called a post subdivision. To really show you what this is doing, so we're going to take a look at our wireframe, which is at the very bottom here. And you can see we can turn that on. And you can see that the cylinder is made up of all sorts of lines and intersections, which are called edges or vertices, and polygons, which are the actual squares that make up these. And you can see as I increase subdivisions or increase the density, how it changes how many of those there are. And this is important when you model because all your models are made up of these flat polygons. And Nomad just has different ways of kind of interacting with those things.
So I can't help but notice there's a little menu on the very right. What do some of these buttons do? Like transform, measure, view, insert, tube, and...
So we'll get to those in a little bit. The view just lets you turn the camera around. You can use the measure tool to measure how tall the cylinder is. Some of these things I don't use very often. Like I'm not really entirely sure what the difference is between transform and gizmo. And some of these others, tubes I use a lot in my other videos, but we won't really get into those for this first one. But what I will show you is, if I turn off constant density, we can adjust just the divisions laterally or just the divisions vertically, right? And I'm not sure what the Z, I guess those adjust the subdivisions on the top here. So you can see those go up. So I'm actually going to turn down the subdivisions on the top, and I'm going to turn down the subdivisions on the Y. Now watch what happens. Up here, there's another thing called post subdivision. What that means is after it's made the cylinder, it's going to what's called subdivide. Subdivide's a very common term in 3D animation, where it basically averages out the in-betweens of all the vertices and edges. And watch, when I turn this on, you see how it rounds it? It's like it applies a smoothing. And this is all based on our subdivisions here, because the fewer vertical subdivisions, you can see the more it smooths it vertically.
Soda can.
Yeah, it's kind of like a soda can here. And the fewer X subdivisions, you can see the more kind of pill-shaped it's becoming, which is good. I think I'm after a little bit of a pill shape here. And same here with on the Z. So we'll get something like that. I think that's a good place to start. And I'm actually going to increase this post subdivisions quite a bit so it really smooths it out. I'm going to take it off of wire and you see just how nice and smooth this is. So this looks like a good body for our cat. And at this point, I'm going to move, if I do any more with him, I'll probably just move into sculpting. So I'm going to hit validate, which is that green check at the top. And now I can't adjust those subdivisions anymore. Instead, it gives me different tools. So that looks pretty basic. I think that's a good shape. Before I really sculpt on here, let's take a look at the arms and the legs really quick, because in addition to adding a new cylinder or whatever, I can actually just duplicate this shape. And I can do that here, let's see, just right in our menu where we are. So instead of going to, one of the ways I could do it is go to scene, and I could hit the button to the right of the trash can, which clones it. But there's actually an easier way to do that, is over here on the left, right above the snap tool, is the clone tool. As soon as I hit that, you can see it's cloned it. Now, I have snapping turned on, so it's automatically snapping every 5 degrees, which is actually good, because I want to rotate this 90 degrees. So I'll get it to where it's exactly like that. And now I'm going to scale that down. This is going to become our feet. Now, it's scaled inside there, so I have to pull it out on this axis. And then I'm going to click and drag on this green square, which just moves it on the blue and red axis. Scale it up, and we're very quickly getting our legs here.
So what do each and every one of those lines do? Because you can tell you have to use them a lot.
So these are the axes. So the red, and this is the same is true in all 3D programs. Red represents an x-axis. Green represents the y-axis, which is actually local to this cylinder. And then blue represents the z or z-axis. And if you just click and drag on those arrows, you can only move it on those axes. If you click and drag on the square, it only does it on every one but the color that it is. So here it's just the red and the blue. Or if I were to do this one, it's just the blue and the green, so on and so forth. And then same with rotating, is we can get it to where it only rotates on the x-axis or the red axis, only on the y, only the z. And then the outer one, the little beige one, is scale. So here we got that, and now I've got a leg. Obviously, we need another leg on the other side. But rather than just cloning it and moving it, we actually want it symmetrical. So what we're going to do is we're going to mirror this over. Now, if I hit the symmetry button, it doesn't do anything. However, if I go and hit the symmetry tab up here in the top right, you can see it's got a little section called mirroring. And we want to mirror from the right side to the left side. So we're just going to hit mirror right to left. And it says it can't apply the symmetry. Do you want to enforce it? And so we're going to say yes. And you can see now we've got 2 legs. Now, if I really want to do a better job of following this drawing, I need to move the legs far apart. You see right now they move together. However, if I turn on a symmetry, now we can move the legs and still obey symmetry. So I'm going to scale these down and get those like that. And maybe even though we have it the drawing, we might kind of splay the legs a little bit like that. All right, so now we have legs, and now we want to make the paws that are kind of pointing down. So from here, I'm going to clone this. So I'm going to hit the clone button, and here's our other set. And symmetry is still turned on. I can now rotate these down like that, and maybe something like that. And now we have the paws that are kind of pointing down. And I'll even scale them a little bit on this axis to squat them a little bit. And maybe make them a little wider just to be similar to the drawing like that. So, all right, so just a little bit of tweaking around here. Now, I want to make the paws a little bit rounder rather than this harsh edge. So one of the things I can do is I can go to our smooth brush, which is right here. You can also access the smooth brush on the left if you want. It's the same way of doing it. And we can start running the smooth brush over this geometry. Now, it only kind of works a little bit well. We could try relax, which is our other option. Sometimes that works better. But really, our problem is we've subdivided it so much on our wireframe. You can see how dense, how many polygons make up each one. And when you have a really dense piece of geometry, it's hard to use the smooth brush to great effect. I could increase the intensity, it might help. But yeah, I want a voxel remesh to do this. Now watch what happens in our wireframe when we do what's called a voxel remesh. I'm going to hit the grid icon up here. I'm going to scroll over to where it says voxel. Click on voxel and it says voxel remeshing. Before I hit the remesh button, you want to drag on this and you can see this like kind of checkerboard that gets imposed over the top, overimposed over the top of the geometry. That represents our resolution. If we have really big checkers and we hit remesh, watch what happens. You can see that it tries to make the wireframe match the size of those checkers. I'm going to hit undo because that's too blocky. However, we're going to hit it and we're going to get and this is really just takes some kind of experience figuring out the size you want, but I'm going to do maybe some right about there. Hit remesh. And you can see it's a lot less dense than those feet below. Now, when we hit our smooth tool, you'll see that it smooths a lot better and a lot faster. And I can take it off wireframe. And it's a lot easier to smooth. Again, the less dense things are, the easier it is to smooth. Sometimes I use the flat tool because the flat tool actually really smooths it. And so that's another kind of trick, is if the smooth tool is just not having enough effect, you'll find that the flat tool works a lot faster, and you just kind of have to go and dull the corners with the flat tool and then smooth. And again, sometimes you want to just hit the relax and see if that gives you better results.
Okay, I couldn't help but notice that your three brushes called the sharp brush, move brush, and drag brush all have blue squares around them.
So up here where it says drag sharp, move sharp, you guys might not have that on your program unless you've made them. These, where it's got the little bit of blue shading around each brush, that means that this is a brush that I've custom built. So again, you can look at my sharp brush tutorial video later and see how I've made those. It's really pretty easy. It's really just tweaking a setting. All right, so from here, what you can do is you can actually keep remeshing. Once you change the form, you can remesh it and it'll kind of make it look a little bit better. I think I might actually go with a lower remesh and hit that and smooth it even more. And I think that's looking pretty good. And now that I'm happy with that, what I'm going to do is increase the resolution. We'll go to almost 200 here and hit remesh. And that's about where I want to keep it. It looks nice and smooth. I want to hit the move tool and I'm going to drag these paws out just a little bit. And this is just doing things to taste. So we'll say we like that. There's the paws. All right, and now, oops, I'm gonna switch this off in normal. Sometimes the move brush is a little harder to use when it's in normal mode. And again, it has different effects depending on the size of your brush too. So don't be afraid to mess with the radius as you try to get the hang of using the move brush. All right, so let's add the big eyes. So to add the big eyes, I'm going to go to my scene tab. And I'm going to hit sphere. I'm going to drag my sphere out here. And I'm going to drag it to the right. And I'm going to scale it down. Now, when we made the foot, we had duplicated it. And then we had to create symmetry. However, if you're still in this mode that has your gizmos, you can actually turn on mirror here. And you'll see that it ghosts the other sphere mirrored. So that makes it a little bit easier. So when we hit validate, it will actually make that other sphere. Now the eyes are more ovals than circles, so we're going to go up like that. And rather than having them really bulbous and sticking out of the body, what we can do is we can flatten it on the Z. And now you can see they look a little bit more normal, but they still stick out the sides. So now we can rotate it on the Y-axis and get that in there. So now you can see they kind of nicely lay up against the side of the body.
Okay, so how do you plan on doing the little slit pupils in the eyes?
All right, let's get to that. I'm gonna hit validate. I may just paint those. We'll play with that in just a second. We'll get the main forms in first, but we're probably going to use the paint tool over here on the right to paint them green. So before I get into painting, let's go ahead and get the ears in, and then and the tail, and then we'll deal with the smaller details, what I call the secondary forms after that. So the ears, there's a lot of ways I could do those. I think what I'm going to do is create a cone. So we're just going to our scene tab, create a cone, and we can move it up here. Looks like he's got a party hat on. Drag it on top of his head. We're gonna scale it down, move it in here. Let's hit our mirror so we can see it over there. Okay, now you can see his ears are more right angles, so it almost needs to go like that, right? And then maybe let's get him a little taller. That actually looks pretty good. You know, I could try to flatten them like this, but I think what I'm going to do, I know what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate them back just slightly and get them kind of squared up a little bit on the back of the head. Let's do kind of split the difference there. Okay, we'll call this good. And from here, I'm going to validate. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually cut off the front of the ear so it's a little bit more flat, so they're not round in the front. Before I do that, I want to voxel remesh them. So I can go here and go to voxel, and we can just find, again, a good resolution. We'll try that. We could actually crank it kind of high. Let's do 153.
Okay, so this is another how do you plan on doing question. We have a Chihuahua in our house with like big ears like a cat. And the ears are really hollow. So how do you plan on like cutting in the shape so the ears are really hollow but they don't look too plain, just
so
shape?
We're going to kind of mess with that next. Right now I'm just using the move tool to kind of get these into place, but we're going to do that right now. Is we're going to cut off the fronts of the ears. We're going to do that with the trim tool. So the trim tool lets you cut out geometry. However, before I do that, one of the things I need to do is I want to go into my left view because I'm going to cut a square out from here. If I hit my trim tool on the bottom right in our menu, we can switch to a rectangle trimmer. Now, whatever rectangle we draw, watch what happens. There, it cut the inverse. I'm going to undo that. That's because I have flip turned on here, okay? So now if I draw a rectangle, you see it cuts it out, right? And if we rotate it around, you see how it cut out the front. So that's kind of what I want to do. But I think, let's give it another shot. Let's cut off just that much. And now we'll switch to our view and spin around. So I think I'm going to go with something like that. And then we're going to cut in the kind of triangles in the ears here in a second. So now that I've done that, I'm going to smooth these edges so they're not as harsh. So getting those smoothed out. We might even use the flatten tool, just like I mentioned, just so I don't have too harsh of an edge. And you see already that's kind of cutting in the ears. Okay, so now to do the inset shapes, like my son was asking here, let me first remesh. I'm going to go to my voxel remesh, Get a good resolution, hit remesh. If you want to, at the bottom, right next to where the wireframe, it says Voxel. That's if you just want to remesh without changing the resolution. You can always just hit that button. So now we're going to use the masking tool that I mentioned earlier. So to do the masking tool, we hit mask. I'm going to pull this down, and we're going to draw in the little triangles on the ears. Just kind of painting them in. And you can see it's hard to get like a sharp point. So what I want to do is actually switch to unmask over here on the left. And now it'll kind of unpaint it. And we're going to get that to where we have the triangles the way we want them. And from here, we want to move the insides of the triangles back into the ears. So we can do that with the transform tool. But before we do that, we actually need to get the inverse of what we have selected here. Let me unmask a little bit more. I'm going to, if we hit our mask settings up here at the top, we can then hit invert, and it will select the inverse of the mask. So we invert it, then we switch to our transform gizmo and move it back into the ears, just like that. And you see how it kind of pushes them in. All right, this would be a good chance, now that we actually have this part masked off, before I get much further, is to go ahead and paint these ears. So I'm going to switch really quickly to my paint tool. And then when I'm on my paint tool, you can actually click on the sphere on the left here, and you can choose a color. And you can see it previews the color as you choose it. So we want kind of a pinkish red in there for the ears. Let's do something like that. And now I'm going to deselect where it says roughness and metalness. All I want to paint here is the color. So I'm going to paint the color. And there it is. It might be a little too red, so we'll go a little bit lighter with it and paint it in. And you can see that I can paint all around. It's not going to paint where it's masked. So since I had it masked, I wanted to go ahead and do that.
So in the paint menu, it had things that said paint all and force paint all. What does that do, and why didn't you use that instead?
I probably could have hit paint all. It does the same thing. So if I change this to green and I hit paint all, it would just make it green. So yeah, I suppose I could have done that. It was just as easy to just use the brush. Force paint all, I think that ends up filling in the part that's masked. So even though it's masked off, if you hit force paint all, it'll paint the mask part. All right, so now I'm going to switch back to my mask tool, and I'm going to go up here where we hit invert, and instead we're just going to clear our mask out. So here we have that. We're getting really close. We just need to add a nose. We got to add the tail, which is going to be a lot of fun. Let's go ahead and add the tail. So to add the tail, we're going to use the tube tool, which I use all the time. I love the tube tool in Nomad. And basically, I want to get to a good view where I can draw the tail and hit curve over here on the left. And then if I just draw the tail and let go, you can see it makes it. You can adjust this little yellow dot to change the thickness of the tail. You can drag these curve points into each other to get rid of them, so we can kind of simplify those. All right, and the other thing is you can switch from, there's a lot of different settings that I go in more detail in my other videos with, but if I switch to spline, it gives me a little bit more rounder curves, so I'm going to do that here. I'm going to drag that into the body, and just like with our other primitives, we can go into our geometry tool, and you can see that it's got a division right here, just like on our wireframe, right? So you can change how dense it is. And again, we can take off the constant density, and we can change, where it is kind of along the curve. And this is helpful because now if I turn on post subdivision, you can see how it rounds, having the different Y values rounds things. So let's go to something like that. And maybe even pull our X subdivision down. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to make it a little bit thicker now. I'm going to validate that. And from here, I'm actually going to hit our little waffle grid up here and hit subdivide one more time to smooth it out. And if we want to drag it more into the body, we can do that. Now, I made a mistake. I'm going to undo a couple of times to get to where I had validated. So when you work in 3D, if you've never worked in 3D before, one of the things you need to always do is always rotate around your model as you work on things, because it looked really good here. You can see as soon as I went here, it's going through the floor. So that means I need to just rotate around and adjust until you can get things sitting on the floor the way you want them. So now that tail's, now the tail's sitting on the floor a little bit better. You could make it come in front of the body a little bit more like the drawing. And at any point, I can actually click just in between these to add a point too. But you can see now it's dropped down. So sometimes you only go, if you click on this cube here, we can switch to the front view. We just want to make sure it's sitting on the floor. Yes. Okay, so I'm just tweaking the tail around. You can see I switched to top view to kind of help pull that up here and just get it exactly where we want it. And another way to check and make sure that it's not going through the floor, this is a nice little trick, is we can add a plane to our scene, which is our floor, and we can scale that way up. And now as we rotate around, now we scaled it so much we kind of cover up our reference image, but we want to go here, and then let's make sure this is sitting right on top of the grid too. So I just move it to where you can just barely see that grid poke through. Call that good. So here's our floor. We'll go ahead and validate the floor. Take off of wireframe mode. And maybe really quick, we will hit our paintbrush up here, and we can recolor the floor. You can just hit that and choose a nice little floor color. Let's do a nice blue. Pick the blue. Our roughness is how shiny something is. I'll make it a little bit shiny and hit paint all on that floor. So now I've got a floor, so it's another easy way to tell if our tail is going through it or not. We can tap on the tail to get back to it. Now I can adjust the thickness, do a couple minor adjustments. It's almost there. I'm going to hit the little waffle grid, and I'm going to turn up my post subdivision so it's smooth.
So another thing about the paint menu, during the paint menu, if you have it open, there were all these different colored spheres with different looks. They'll all look different. What do those do?
So if you want to try just some other, these are just pre-made materials. So like say, if we want the floor to just be this shiny metal blue, we can just highlight that and hit paint all. Now it doesn't really look particularly shiny. It's because we haven't done the lighting yet. But these are just a quick way of getting a material already in there. So there's a really shiny floor. Yeah, I'm just going to use a blue like this, maybe a little bit rough, or sorry, a little shiny here, which means our roughness is turned down and hit paint all.
And what does metalness do?
Metalness is how metal it is. So usually something is either all the way metal or not, but sometimes you'll tweak those settings just to kind of get the effect that you want. Okay, getting really close. We just need to add the nose and the mouth in, and then we can get to coloring and finishing them off. So we are going to, I think for the nose, we could do a cone, but I think I'm going to do that maybe with a, let's try the triplanar. Triplanar is a very different piece of geometry. So to do triplanar, what I want to do first is I'm going to go to my scene, and I'm going to hit the eyes on all our other meshes. So we're only looking at our triplanar object here, right? And you can see the triplanar, it's got a little masked circle around it. What that means is you can draw this mask, and as you edit, say, the masking on the triplanar, you can see it edits the geometry as if it were projecting it, right? So you can imagine that this is like a shadow box, what sort of shadow it would cast. Well, this would be really good for doing a nose, because what we can do over here is we can just make this the shape of our nose. So we can hit our unmask, and we can paint this into more of a triangle shape. There you go. And now when I rotate around it, you can see that in the front it's got that triangle shape. Now we want maybe this to be round in the front, and then maybe it's kind of flatter on top and flat on the back. But I have symmetry turned on. I need to turn symmetry off here. Flat on the back, like that. Let's rotate around this, and you see that it looks like a cat nose. You know, we could do more here by tweaking the bottom of it to do the same. Just kind of flatten it out. So anyways, that's what a triplanar does. It takes some getting used to. From here, I can validate that and then switch to my smooth tool and kind of smooth out the front. But yeah, there's a cat nose. We might use our flatten tool a little bit. There you go, just get it dialed in. Okay, and I probably want to turn our symmetry back on now that I'm editing this.
Okay, what does smudge do?
Smudge? I think smudge is for painting. When you paint, it's if you want to smudge the colors around.
Okay.
All right, so here's our nose. We are going to, let's go ahead and paint the nose. So we'll hit this ball down here and let's make it a black nose. And it can be kind of shiny with our roughness there. And then just hit paint all. And there we go. There's our nose. Now I'm going to hit our scene and we can hit the eyes that unhides all our other geometries that we had. And you can see our triplanar one is just sitting down here in the middle. So what I need to do is scroll down here to our transform gizmo. And from here I can move this into place. I can scale it, move it on the axis, get it right where it needs to be. So something like that. And we need to zoom in and make sure it's sitting on the surface of that cylinder. So I'm just pulling it back on that axis where it gets into our cylinder. Okay, almost done, and then we'll get into painting. So I could just paint the mouth on there. I could make it as tubes. What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to use the crease tool. This is similar to my sharp brush, but since you might not have the sharp brush, use my crease tool to draw. I'm going to click on our cylinder, make sure I'm editing our cylinder. And you can see I can kind of crease in those lips and draw the lips. Now, you can see that the geometry is looking really weird here. If I turn on my wireframe, that's why it's doing that. It's because I haven't voxel remeshed this, so when I start creasing, it doesn't have a lot of geometry to work with. I'm going to undo that, and we will do a voxel remesh on the body before we start drawing this. So I'm going to hit my little waffle grid, go to voxel, and let's get this one pretty small. I think you see how small those checkers are. We'll do that right around 400 or 500. Hit remesh, and you'll see all the geometry, how it gets really dense. Take it off the wireframe, and now if we do the crease tool, it's a lot more natural. I'm going to bring down the size of my brush and just crease these in. Sometimes when I do a crease like this, I like to go back with, say, like a clay buildup tool, a clay tool, and kind of paint on top, make sure I'm not on subtract mode. Paint back in, kind of around the edges to kind of thicken it back up. Hit smooth that out, and if I need to, maybe do it one more time. So we'll go to crease, from a crease brush, crease in that middle. You can also see what a subtract of a crease does, and it kind of pulls things up, and that kind of works too. But overall, that looks pretty good. I think really like his arms might need to be a little lower, so I can just tap on those arms, switch to my transform gizmo, and just maybe move them down a little bit. Or maybe it's the face that needs to come up, so I can highlight the cylinder and instead maybe use my move brush and just push that mouth up like that. Do that, and then I'm going to take the nose and just move it right there.
So, since this drawing was made in 2D, and this is like a 3D model, maybe, I think it would be cool if for the paws you could add claws, because that's something that wasn't added in the drawing that might be really cool to add.
Well, we do have the foot pads. I was thinking there's a few different ways. We could just paint the foot pads on, or maybe I do those as spheres. I think spheres might be fun, so I'm going to hit a sphere here. And we're going to scale this down. And we will, just like the eyes, we're going to flatten it in the Z. And I'm going to rotate it here. And so these are going to be our paw pads. I'll turn on mirror. Push those in, scale them down, just get right where we want. And let's see if it'll let me change the color. Good, pink here. All right, and we'll call that good. Maybe before I validate this, I'm gonna go ahead and clone it. You see I cloned it, and from here I can just scale it, move it, scale it, move it, scale it, move it. We'll clone it again. Sure it's sitting right there. And we'll clone it one more time. And get this one out here. I think I forgot to actually paint it. So I changed the color, but I didn't paint it. So I'm gonna hit this, hit paint all. Hit this, paint all, paint all, and then down here, paint all. And then on each one of those, you can see I need to hit validate to get that mirror in there. So click on each one, hit validate. And I don't know that I want to do sharp claws coming off here because I do want it to look like the drawing as much as I can. And also I'm anxious to get to the lighting, get him finished up. So we don't make this video too long. From here, I'm going to click on the eyes. And I'm going to use the mask trick, just like we did. So if I hit here, somehow I filled in that mask. Let me undo that. Okay, so we could mask off the eyes. The resolution isn't as high as I'd like. You can see it's kind of pixelated here. So before I do that, we want to voxel remesh. So we can crank up the resolution, remesh. All your painting and stuff like that is based on the resolution of your geometry. Paint the eyes, and here we're just going to do that same trick that we did on the ears. So we'll paint those eyes in. And then maybe switch to our unmask tool to make this kind of sharp. Let's see, get that the way we want it. Okay, and now we'll zoom out, and we will invert our mask, hitting on our mask settings up here. Hit invert, and from here we can switch to a green color. And we'll hit paint all. This is painting the roughness and metal values, by the way. Really, I just want to deal with the color for now. And maybe instead of just leaving those as they are, we will switch to our transform gizmo and just kind of pull them out so they're kind of raised a little bit on top of the surface. We may need to kind of scoot them into place. So let's try that. All right, and you can see it's gray still over here because it's masked. So I just need to go to my mask tool and click up on my settings and hit clear. Clears out the mask. All right. So you can see he's looking pretty good. I think there's some other just kind of finessing that could be done. I won't get carried away, but I'll use the flatten tool to kind of curve out his forehead a little bit. And maybe I'll use the move tool to kind of widen these ears. So I'm just tapping on those meshes to edit them. Okay, so we can kind of widen that and maybe widen the top of his head a little bit too. Just kind of make him a little bit more lumpy and fun like the drawing is. Let's get those out here. All right, and then maybe curve in his back just a little bit. This is just a taste. You'll probably hardly ever see the back. All right, so you can see we've created the cat. I think that's about as far as we will go as far as sculpting. So now we just want to get the lighting and those settings looking good. First of all, our cat's a little shiny. Yeah, you have a question?
So the eyes in the drawing have a little bit of an outline. Is it possible for you to do that in Nomad?
Yeah, so we can paint an outline before we start dealing with the other stuff. So I'm going to click on just his body. I'm going to switch to my paint tool. We are going to paint in a black. I'm only dealing with the color, not the roughness or metallic. And then bring my brush size down a little bit. And I'm just going to paint around this. And we can kind of color his eyes. Now we could do this with just the geometry. You could just build up the geometry around the eyes. That's really just kind of a, you do it to taste, whatever you like. So let's get that. And then while I'm at it, I'm going to do the same thing with the inner part of his mouth. I'll just paint that in. There we go. And that'll just enhance whatever effects we have. I might switch to a white and just kind of clean up this a little bit. Okay. But the outlines can also be achieved by some other effects, something called ambient occlusion, that we might talk about here in a little bit once we get through lighting. So you'll see that here in just a second. So, but first, let's deal with the fact that we got a shiny cat. We don't want our cat to be shiny. So I'm going to select him. I'm going to hit my paintbrush tool, and I'm going to untick color and only deal with the roughness. And you can see as I mess with roughness, it changes how shiny he is. We want him all the way rough. He's not shiny at all. So we crank it all the way up, hit paint all. From here, we can just click on the hands. We'll do the same thing. Roughness is already turned up, hit paint all. Do it to the tail, paint all. Do it to the legs, paint all. Make sure we get the leg. I think I did that. And let's do the ears, paint all. The pads, maybe they're a little shiny, so we can just tweak them to where there's just a little bit of sheen to them. And just paint all, and then make sure you select each one of those paths, because right now they're all different geometries. You can, in your scene menu, combine geometries. I wish I do a lot in my other videos. Just make sure we got all these. I think I did. Paint all. Now the eyes we actually want kind of shiny. They're probably as shiny as they should be. We can play with that. Let's get them right there. Hit paint all. And same with the nose. I've already dialed in the shininess, I think. Well, let's mess with it a little bit. Let's get it right there. Paint all. All right, so now he's the right shininess. So from here, let's see, I think I'm constantly looking at my reference here and kind of reconsidering things. I think I need to actually move the head a little lower. And then just take the ears and switch to my transform gizmo. Move those ears back down over the head. There we go. That's looking better to me. You can see those ears stick out a little bit here. What we can do is we can switch to our move tool and just scoot them in. We could merge those ears with the head and then Voxel remesh. That might be worth doing. I'll show you that really quick before we get into lighting. I'm going to go to my scene, and right now you can see if I turn these on and off, this mesh, we could relabel it ears, and sometimes that's easier. Now it says mesh ears, but that works. And then there's the body. If I highlight the body and go to my scene, you can see it's this one. It's called cylinder. So I'm going to take cylinder, and I'm going to take mesh ears and make sure there's a check mark next to each, and hit simple merge, or I could do voxel merge, but for this, I'll do simple merge. I'm going to hit my little waffle grid, go to my voxel remesh, make sure I've got a good resolution for it to remesh, hit remesh. And what happens is the geometries kind of merge into each other. And sometimes it creates some kind of weird artifacts, but you can just smooth those out. And you can see that those ears are perfectly welded into that head now. So that's cool. All right. So from here, let's add some lighting and effects. I'm going to go ahead and turn off our reference image for this part. So I'm going to uncheck reference image. And we're going to hit the little sun. Right now, there's an environment that is lighting up this cat. And you can rotate the environment under rotation and change exposure. You can click a different image and look and see what different environments might light up the cat in different ways. We can pick maybe something like this, but really, and then we'll rotate it to where that light's kind of in front of them. Really, this is your ambient light for your scene. If you want specific lighting, you can hit add light, and it creates a light in our scene. And if you click on the light, you can see you can move it around and, move move it around on the axis if I can grab it. You know. This is just a sunlight, so sunlight position doesn't matter, only matters on rotation. So let's do the sun rotated this way. If I wanted to, I can click on the light and hit the little color of the light. We could change the color of the sunlight. You can change the intensity. Or we could change it to, say, like a spotlight. And so here's our spotlight. And we could go raise it up, make sure that spotlight is, in fact, aiming at the cat. Yeah.
Can you explain what every single type of light does?
So a spotlight, most of this stuff, you're kind of better off just kind of playing with your settings and seeing what it does. But really, it's just three types of lights. There's a directional light, which only the rotation matters. It's like a sunlight. There's the spotlight, which is just like a spotlight in theater. It's got a cone shape to it as it aims at the subject. And then there's a point light. And the point light is just like a light bulb you would have in the house. If you lit it up, you moved it around, it's just like a pool of light or a sphere of light. And so we'll light him up with a spotlight. I don't know if we'll do much more than that for the purposes of this. I now have that ambient light and I have the spotlight in there. I think it actually looks pretty good. Next, I'm going to play with our post-processing features. And this is a lot of fun. This is this little camera iris here. You hit post-process. And this is where you can play with all sorts of effects. Now, there's things like reflections. I don't have anything that's really reflective in here, so it doesn't matter. But ambient occlusion is what I was mentioning earlier. It darkens around the edges or cavities of an object. So if you want to see like kind of the edges of his paws outlined more, you can switch and turn that on and off, and you can crank up the strength and the size of the ambient occlusion to really see what those different effects give off. Curvature bias, all those. I don't want to get into too much detail on what all this does. You really just want to play around with it. You can color grade it, which means you can just play with kind of the color correction of the scene. You can add curvature, which does more like a cartoon outline effect. You can chromatic aberration, which gives it a kind of a VHS looking effect. And you can vignette, which darkens around the sides. You can add some grain. I usually have a little bit of grain in there. Okay, he's looking pretty good. I think the last thing we want to do is I'm going to go to my display settings, which is this gear on the top right. I'm going to turn off our grid now because we don't need it anymore. And maybe I'll highlight my plane and go to my gizmo tool since we're done with the reference and just scale that way up. So we're mostly just looking at that blue plane. And now our scene can get a little hard to navigate when you do that. So you just want to be extra careful. You're kind of where you want it to be. And it's really because I've changed the scale of my scene by doing that. So maybe we'll pull this back down a little bit. Let's do that just so it's a little more manageable. So there's our cat. And let's see. The only other thing I was going to mention in terms of lighting and stuff is I'm trying to remember where it is. Oh, yeah, right here. In our image where we turn a reference, you can change the background color.
That's
so we can hit. Yeah, just like that. So we can try to match maybe the blue, or maybe we have do another color. Let's see what we got.
Maybe to match the baby blue on the ground, maybe try a light pink.
Okay, something that goes with it. So we do like a pink.
Bright pink, yeah. So that way it looks like a floor and a wall.
Yeah. And so there you have it. That's essentially, and you'll see when I rotate around the scene, it kind of rotates around whatever you have selected. So there's that. You can also go into your camera tool and you can bookmark a view by hitting add view. And so that way, if you ever get like mixed around or whatever, and you want to go back to it, you hit the camera and just click on the view again. It takes you right back there to add view. All right. I'm going to do a little cleanup and then I'll show you one more thing and be done. Is you'll notice that there's still some kind of pixelation around the face and stuff like that, and even the tail's a little blocky. You can always highlight these things and subdivide them by hitting the waffle grid, go to multi-res, and hit subdivide. You do that, it will just smooth things out. It doubles your geometry, or actually, I guess it's exponential. It's like splits one polygon into 4, so I guess that's quadrupling your geometry. And we'll do that here with the body. You can subdivide, and it might be worth going back in once that's done and repainting or resculpting some of these things. That's my pinch tool. I need the crease. There we go. And we can go back to our paint and paint this black. So just check on the color, and then a black. Like that. And same with the eyes. Just kind of clean that up, because now that we have more resolution to work with, we can go in and paint those a little bit better and a little cleaner. Sometimes, again, with that large plane, it can get a little hard to navigate around our scene. So just be warned. You can always turn off the visibility of the floor just for editing. Even his eyes are a little bit pixelated, so we'll highlight those and subdivide those as well. Now, if your device isn't very powerful to handle these subdivisions, it does eat up a lot of memory. It'll usually warn you before you do something too drastic or crazy. All right, so I'm happy with that. Let's go back, and I'm going to go back to my view. Oops, I hit add view. Didn't mean to do that. Click on that. Okay, so lastly, I'm going to show you how to kind of show off the model. From here, we can go to our folder, scroll down, and we can either export the model to, say, Sketchfab or something, or we can render an image. And that's, you can hit export PNG, and you can save it to your photos or whatever. Or we can do a turntable. Let me go ahead and save this model here. And to do a turntable, you actually want to click the Nomad button up here. And it says turntable speed, and you can hit on, you can adjust your speed and hit turntable. Now, it zooms way out to show you that plane. Oh, and it's actually letting me sculpt in there. So you actually have to kind of zoom in. And we'll end it on this. Here we've sculpted a cat. I hope this video has been thorough enough for you to get you guys started making awesome sculpts. And maybe it'll kind of demystify some of my other videos if you're having a hard time following along. You can imagine this cat could very easily be a raving rabbit from the Rabbids game, or a minion. You could use some really similar techniques to make something like that. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed it. In the meantime, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.